So let's talk now about the second essay in the genealogy of morality. And the first thing that we meet in the second essay is the sovereign individual. Now, the sovereign individual is the ripest fruit, the latest fruit, the last fruit, possibly, well, maybe not the last fruit, but a late fruit on the tree of human development. And this is quite important, that in some ways the sovereign individual sounds a bit like the masters that we met in the start of the first essay, but there are some important differences as well. So the sovereign individual makes law for himself, and I'll use male pronouns for the sovereign individual because I would imagine that Nietzsche probably saw this character as male gendered. So the sovereign individual has the prerogative to promise, right? Now, a prerogative is a right that only certain individuals have. In British law, we speak of royal prerogative. That's to say, rights that the Queen has, that nobody else has. So the right to promise, the prerogative to promise, isn't given to everybody. It's something that just some people have. Only those people who meet certain criteria. What are the criteria? Well, first of all, you must have a memory. You must remember that you gave a promise. Second, you must have an unbreakable, enduring will. So having decided to keep a promise, that decision must stick, even in the face of misfortunes, or if it costs you your life, right? The truly sovereign individual takes their own promises to be utterly binding. So you need to have an unbreakable will, and you also need to feel your promises to be important. So it's not just that you have an unbreakable will to do whatever you want, it's that you feel responsibility, but you don't feel responsibility as a burden, you feel responsibility as a privilege. So the sovereign individual has some features that sound quite aristocratic. And it's in this sense that the sovereign individual sounds a bit like the masters that we met in the first essay. But there's an important difference, which is that it takes thousands of years to produce the sovereign individual. The masters are at the start of the story. The masters are at the start of the human story, whereas the sovereign individual is more like towards the end. And the key difference is that the happy warriors, the masters who live with the master morality, they're driven by shame before others of their sort, right? So, and they inherit their morality from each other. So they follow a customary morality, and it's a public morality. Whereas the sovereign individual gives law to himself, whereas doesn't rely on society to tell him what the moral law ought to be. Why does it take so long to produce this person, the sovereign individual? Well, because you need to go through the process of the invention of conscience, right? So you need to produce a person in whom conscience is so finely developed that it's no longer just the voice of society. It's become their own awareness of their status as a sovereign individual. That takes a long time. Nietzsche then goes back to the beginning of the story, or rather what he takes to be the beginning of the story, which is the origins of guilt or bad conscience. And he wants to tell a material story, right? So this is a typical Nietzschean process that we start out with a material relation or a material condition, namely debt and the feeling of indebtedness, or the feeling of fear about what will happen if your debt doesn't get paid, right? So there doesn't have to be anything moral going on. You know, you can be in debt to somebody else, you can not pay your debt, and you can find yourself paying whatever forfeit you agreed, and all of that can happen without anything moral. If you think about The Merchant of Venice, this is a story in which somebody agrees to pay a pound of their own flesh if they're unable to pay a debt, and the story depends on deciding whether that penalty will be enforced. So the idea of debt being insured, or debts being held against chunks of the debtor's own body, isn't invented by Nietzsche. It's there in history, at least in the form of Shakespeare's plays. So, and Nietzsche plays on a pun between being guilty and being in debt. So how does this work? Well, one of the elements, one of the key claims, is that human beings have an intrinsic need for cruelty. Right? Nietzsche says that it's part of our psychological outlook that we just have to be cruel. And there's some evidence for this. I mean, there's some obvious support. The large crowds that would gather to see executions when there were public executions, popularity of gladiatorial sports and bullfighting and so on. All those people who watch motorsport hoping for crashes, all those people who watch combat sports hoping for somebody to be badly damaged. So maybe there's some truth in it, although perhaps it isn't the whole truth about human nature. Anyway, Nietzsche says that the crucial thing, the crucial moment in the development of human morality is when most people could no longer go to war, right? So we're bound by the chains of society and peace. And the additional bit, and peace, is really important because, of course, the nobles are bound by the chains of society. They can't just do whatever they want because the other nobles will notice, right, and will do something about it. But the nobles are able to vent their need for cruelty first on the battlefield. They have the pleasure of hacking people to death, and also in the treatment of captives and the administration of justice. If you're an Iron Age noble, you can administer justice of a pretty bloody sort and watch it being carried out. Right, you can order people to be crucified if you want to. So the nobles, at least in the original organisation of society where they are the warrior aristocracy, they get to they get to exercise their need for cruelty. But most people don't. As society develops and you get large numbers of people living in towns, basically I think this is the emergence of towns and the emergence of townsfolk. That's to say, people who are neither farmers nor warrior aristocrats. So the merchants, the guildsmen, the craftspeople, the bakers and candlestick makers who make up the townsfolk, they are bound by law. They can't go around inflicting cruelty on anybody, so they have to inflict it on themselves. How does this work? Well, you split. You get an internal division within you, and part of you becomes the part that inflicts cruelty, and the other part of you suffers the cruelty. By the way, do note that there's no assumption in Nietzsche that the most powerful people will be the most cruel. Actually, the more powerful you are, the less immediate need you have to display your power, right? So if you are the big gangster boss, or you're the emperor, you can let people off, and it's an expression of your greatness. These acts of mercy can be an expression of your confidence in your power. You know that you don't have to exact justice every time, right? So a low-level gangster, whenever anybody crosses him, he has to exact revenge because he's in competition with other low-level gangsters for his street corner, right? So if anybody disrespects him or sets foot on his turf, he's got to do something about it. But if you're the big boss, somebody disrespects you, somebody crosses you in some way, you can kind of look at them and go, yeah, you know what? This time I'm going to exercise my capricious power by letting you off. I just laugh and slap your cheeks and say, don't do it again. Mercy is an exercise of power. Mercy is something that the powerful can indulge in and makes them feel powerful. And therefore, it's not necessarily the most powerful people who will inflict the most cruelty.